Hello, fabulous second grade scholars. Welcome to another episode of Cooking Up Weather with Ms. Lund. Today we're going to learn about the Goldilocks of weather. Not too little rain, not too much rain, but just the right amount. We'll see what happens. So, fabulous scholars, too much rain is called a flood. Too little rain is called a drought. And we're going to start with some regular ground. And as you can see, I've put some dirt in this time. It really is ground. It's kind of dry. If I planted seeds in this, they wouldn't do too well because it's kind of dry. So when you plant things like this, you either water it or you hope for a little bit of precipitation. And if you get a little bit of precipitation, here's my precipitation, right? It just gets absorbed by the ground. It soaks it up and there, just right. I didn't make mud. I'll just add a little bit of water. And if you can see on the side, right, there's not, other than where my wet hand grabbed it, there's not really any water down in the bottom, right? It's been absorbed by the dirt. And although you can see some wet spots where a little bit more of my water fell, it's still pretty good. This is not a flood. Even if it starts to rain a lot and you get even more water in there, as long as the ground can absorb it, soak it up like a sponge, it's not a flood. We're still not having a flood. You can't see any water just sitting on the bottom. But if it keeps raining or it rains a lot very hard, like say in the middle of a hurricane, then the water can't absorb it anymore, or it's coming too fast for the ground to absorb, takes some time to soak it up, then you start to get a flood. Can you see how that's starting to shift a little bit? If you look at the bottom, and you start to see the water that's puddling in there. And if it continues to come, you're going to have big problems. Now, if I left it as this, in about 2 minutes, it would be soaked up evenly throughout the dirt and the flood would be done. But let's say that it just keeps precipitating. It just keeps raining and there's just so much water. Can you see how this is moving around already? It's not really ground anymore. It's not even mud. Look at this, right? It's just water in there. And if you look at the side of it, can you see the water in there? There's just so much water in there. This is a flood. And if it were to keep going, the dirt would mix with the water still, but it would be more and more water in there. Floods aren't usually just like this clean water that we might swim in, like in a lake. It's often water mixed with dirt or other things, which can make it really, really dangerous. Because if this is moving around, you can't see what's underneath it. You can't tell what's underneath it. And if it's flowing fast and you get stuck in all this stuff, you could be in big trouble. That's why they give out flood warnings and tell you if you see big puddles of water, or if you see stuff like this, where it's even more watery than mud, stay out of it. You don't know what's at the bottom of that, and you just got to give it time for the water to go away. There's one more thing you need to know about floods. If it happens super, super fast, like a dam breaks, it's called a flash flood, because it happens in a flash. And that just means the water is moving very quickly, covering the land so quickly it doesn't have time to get absorbed. Now, fabulous scholars, this is too much water. And floods can happen quickly, especially if they're a flash flood, or they can happen over several days. But eventually the water does go down, it gets absorbed by the ground, or it evaporates, and the flood ends. The opposite of that, hang on, I gotta wash the flood off my hands. The opposite of the flood is the drought. Now, I prepared my drought ahead of time because droughts are really, really slow. So floods can happen very quickly, even in minutes, sometimes days. Droughts can take months or even years to happen. So this is my dirt, my ground, and things were even growing in there, doing pretty well. And then I didn't water it. And then the next day I didn't water it. And then the next day I didn't water it. And 2 weeks later, drought. The ground gets kind of hard. Sometimes it cracks. Plants are not growing very well in here. There's not enough water for them. And droughts last for a long time. Now, they also depend on how much rain does a place usually get. So for example, a desert doesn't get a lot of rain anyway. It takes even less rain than that for a desert to have a drought. On the other hand, in Minnesota, we get rain pretty regularly in the spring and the summer. So if we don't get rain every once a week or every couple of weeks and get a nice good hard rain, then we might be in a little bit of a drought. The state of California had a drought for several years. It didn't mean that they didn't get any rain. It meant that they got much less rain than they usually did. And so that made it hard for things to grow. So not enough rain or less rain than usual over a long period of time, sometimes even years, is a drought. And it makes it hard for plants to grow. Too much water, usually in a short amount of time, because remember, water can evaporate or be absorbed by the earth, makes a flood. So floods are fast and they're over reasonably quickly. Again, if it's a huge flood, usually because of a hurricane, it can take weeks for the water to go away. But usually it's shorter than that, maybe only a day or two. Droughts last for a very long time. So hopefully, if you're making your clouds and they're precipitating, you get just the right amount of precipitation. Not too much, not too fast, just a nice amount, and not too little, because you don't want floods or droughts. It makes it hard for things to grow, and floods in particular can be very dangerous. So scholars, if you're making a drought or a flood at home, well, just be careful. They aren't ideal kinds of weather. Hopefully, though, the precipitation is just right to get your garden growing, and I will see you next time on Cooking Up Weather with Ms. Lund. Bye, scholars.